Here's chapter 756 of the Labour government using a sledgehammer to crack a couple of walnuts. Angela Rayner is outlining her anti-landlord erotic dream of condemning an entire industry. It's interesting, a level of stereotyping that you'd get locked up for if it pertained to any other walk of life. Eviction made harder, essentially. Now, on the face of it, it sounds a bit reasonable, isn't it? Kicking somebody out of their home onto the streets is clearly a terrible thing. But the reality, of course, this is just one aspect of it. We'll come on to all the others. The reality is somewhat different. Evicting a tenant is already a mind-blowingly complex and lengthy process. At best, it will take a landlord months. In many cases, it could be over a year, getting into 2 years. And at an awful lot of expense for the landlord, money they never get back. It's a big fat urban myth to suggest you can just kick a tenant out of their accommodation because you don't like them anymore. That doesn't happen. And yet this is sort of central to how the government are selling this. This is central to what the government are going to implement. And that's just the start, by the way. We've also got the issue of rents. Landlords will only be allowed to raise rents once a year. The government will tell you when you can raise rents. And to the market rate. These are rent controls, surely. The government has said it will ban in-tenancy rent increases from being written into contracts in legislation set to become law by next summer. Now, currently, if a landlord wants to raise the rent, they can either write it into the contract as a yearly set increase, or they can issue something called a Section 13 notice if they want to raise it. A tenant can dispute a rent increase, but only after it's been enforced. I know it's tricky. Often a landlord increases the rent because their mortgage has increased, not always making the thousands, tens of thousands that people think. Other commitments announced today include a ban on rental bidding wars and a further ban on landlords refusing housing benefit claimants or parents as tenants, single parents as tenants, although this is already illegal. The government will also legally require landlords and letting agencies to publish an asking rent for the property, which will apparently prevent them from asking for or encouraging or accepting any bids above that price. The government, again, will essentially control the rents. So I guess, first and foremost, I have to aim this mostly at renters and landlords and those with an experience that could tell me it's been anything other than straightforward. Most landlords, by the way, don't own a massive property portfolio. They run a clean and fair business. Why would they want to do it any other way? It's not in their interest to run a business in any other way. But if you've had experience, there are bad ones. Of course there are bad ones. There are bad things everywhere, whether it's in the police, whether it's in politics, whether it's in landlords. But they are tiny in amount in comparison to the good guys. But I'm going to ask this question. If you've had that experience of the landlord from hell, Rigsby on booster rockets, where the mice have got better rights than you and the ceiling is painted in mystic mould, the landlord that will hike your rent because he's having a bad day, the landlord will think it's okay to come into your house or your room any time they fancy because they happen to own it. Yes, there are bad landlords. If you've experienced that at that side, I want to hear from you. 0344 499 1000. Simultaneously, you might be the landlord that's had your fair of experience from the tenant from hell, the non-rent payer, the dealer, the one who thinks bashing out 500 decibels of Cradle of Filth at 3 in the morning is perfectly okay, who thinks the sink is the toilet and keeping things clean is some sort of option. They exist as well, I would argue, in probably larger numbers. 0344 499 1000. No fault eviction. It just sounds a great headline. The other, I think, salient and central point around this whole landlord thing, and it's something that Julia just waded into on the handover a second ago, is that actually landlords, private landlords in this country, are currently propping up the housing crisis. If it wasn't for private landlords, the housing crisis would be far worse than it currently is. And the last time I looked, by the way, having a business model where you rent out a room or a house it's not North Korea, kids. All right, it's a perfectly legit business. Why would that be something we would want to penalise? Why would a multi-million, possibly multi-billion-pound industry be penalised at every turn? And this doesn't even get into all the other regulations around being a landlord. This is sort of the tenant versus landlord relationship. There's loads more. It's really hard being a landlord, okay? Yes, there are bad ones. Most are not. But if you've got experience on either side of this, as the landlord, as the tenant, I'm all ears at this end. I want to hear some anecdotal stories